Hey YouTube, this is Johnny from Adventures with John and Johnny. In today's video, we are going to be checking out the super old church from the Revolutionary War and an event called the Great Runaway, where a bunch of Indians and British guys attacked and killed American settlers.
The Battle of Fort Freeland and Fort Rice. Sacrifice, survival, and the hidden cost of revolution. Before the Founding Fathers signed declarations, before the Redcoats fell at Yorktown, the American Revolution was already raging in the Pennsylvania wilderness, in silence, fire, and blood. This is the story of Fort Freeland, a small frontier outpost that paid the price for survival, and of the families, like the Vincents, the Freelands, and the Durhams, whose names were nearly erased by history, but whose stories still echo in the ground they defended. This is also the story of Fort Rice, the stone monument that rose from their ashes. Chapter 1, Frontier Fire. Warrior Run, 1778-1779. By 1778, the fertile Warrior Run Valley in Northumberland County was home to dozens of newly arrived families from New Jersey, the Freelands, Vincents, Durhams, and Goulds among them. Jacob Freeland, a Revolutionary War veteran and millwright, had built a working grist mill upstream and, sensing danger, enclosed his home with upright and horizontal logs, forming a crude yet functional stockade that became known as Fort Freeland. While not a military fort in the strictest sense, Fort Freeland represented the last stronghold for the valley's settlers against the creeping violence of the war, a war now deeply intertwined with Native American alliances, British frontier strategy, and generational survival. But long before the battle, the killing had already begun. Chapter 2, A Mother's Nightmare. The Scalping of Margaret McClintock Durham. In the fall of 1778, Margaret McClintock Durham, only 22 years old, set out on horseback with her infant cradled in her arms. She rode alongside another settler woman, Mrs. McKnight, fleeing from the increasing hostilities that plagued the valley. Their husbands followed behind them on foot, a precaution meant to avoid attracting attention from raiding parties, but it wasn't enough. As the women neared a wooded bend in the trail, just 2 miles below the mouth of Warrior Run Creek, a Seneca war party ambushed them. Gunshots rang out. Mrs. McKnight's horse bolted in terror. Her infant nearly fell from her arms, but she caught the baby by the leg, turned the horse, and escaped. Margaret was not so fortunate. Her horse was shot from beneath her. She was thrown violently to the ground. The warriors descended. In moments, her infant was torn from her arms and killed, and Margaret herself was scalped while still alive. A gruesome act meant both as ritual and terror. Her bloodied body was left among the fallen leaves, presumed dead by her attackers. But she wasn't dead. Hours later, she was found, still conscious, whispering for water. She was carried 16 miles to Northumberland, where Dr. William Plunkett, a patriot physician and former militia colonel, tended to her wounds. Margaret survived. She bore 6 more children and lived until 1829, though she carried the scars, physically and emotionally, to her grave. Chapter 3, The Vincent and Freeland Boys, Blood in the Cornfields. The last days before the fall of Fort Freeland were marked by a chilling escalation of violence. On July 21, 1779, just 1 week before the battle, a group of young men and boys were working in the cornfields east of the fort, hoping to bring in what remained of the valley's vital grain harvest. Among them were Isaac Vincent, 22 years old, Jacob Freeland, a cousin, Elias Freeland, Michael Freeland, age 17, and Benjamin Vincent, only 10 years old. Without warning, a British-aligned native raiding party, likely Seneca or Cayuga warriors, emerged from the tree line. In the first moments of the attack, Isaac Vincent, Jacob Freeland, and Elias Freeland were shot, killed, and scalped. The remaining boys fled. Benjamin, barely old enough to work the field, dove into a furrow to hide. Fearing he would be stepped on or seen, he crawled to a nearby tree and climbed it. But the warriors saw him. He was captured. What followed haunted him for the rest of his life. Hours after his capture, a warrior thrust something into Benjamin's face, his brother Isaac's bloody scalp. The boy, now a prisoner, realized he was utterly alone. Michael Freeland was also taken, along with Benjamin. The family had lost Isaac and Jacob to gunfire and scalping. The rest were marched in chains northward, 275 miles to Fort Niagara, along the Sheshequin and Geneseo paths, through swamps, ravines, and mountain passes. Chapter 4. The Fall of Fort Freeland. On the morning of July 28, 1779, Fort Freeland was surrounded. Over 400 enemy forces, including 300 Seneca warriors led by Chief Hiokatu and 100 British Loyalist Rangers under Captain John MacDonald, encircled the outpost. Inside the fort were about 75 settlers, but only 21 were armed and able-bodied men. The defense was desperate. Women inside the fort melted pewter plates and spoons into musket balls. Children ran water and carried powder. But the odds were impossible. By midday, the powder was gone. With casualties rising and no relief in sight, the defenders negotiated surrender. The men would be taken as prisoners of war. The women, children, and elderly would be spared. But surrender didn't mean safety. Chief Hiokatu ordered all the wounded prisoners executed. The fort was looted, torched, and the captives were bound and prepared for the long march north, including Cornelius Vincent and his remaining sons. Chapter 5. Boone's Last Stand. Unaware of the fort's fall, Captain Hawkins Boone, cousin to the famous Daniel Boone, approached with 30 Pennsylvania militiamen. Spotting the attackers feasting and resting, he struck, killing several warriors in a surprise charge. But the British regrouped swiftly. Outnumbered and outflanked, Boone's men were routed. Boone was killed in the fighting, a final act of resistance at Fort Freeland, now reduced to smoldering ruins. Chapter 6. Shackled and Taken. The Captives' March. The prisoners, including Benjamin, Daniel, Bethuel, and Cornelius Vincent, along with Michael Freeland, were forced to march over 250 miles to Fort Niagara through native-held territory. Cornelius was shackled so tightly that he carried deep scars on his legs for the rest of his life. He spent 18 months in captivity before being released. His son Bethuel remained missing for 4 years, presumed dead, until he returned home in a sleigh and reunited with his wife in a moment of shock and joy. Benjamin, captured at age 10, would not see freedom until 1782. Chapter 7. The Rise of Fort Rice. In response to the fall of Fort Freeland, the Continental Army built a new defense, Fort Rice, located on Montgomery family land near present-day Turbotville. Constructed in 1779-1780 by the German Regiment of Maryland and Pennsylvania, Fort Rice was built from native limestone, one of the only stone forts in Pennsylvania's frontier. In September 1780, it was attacked by Loyalist forces and native allies. Buildings around the fort were burned, but the fort itself held. Colonel Samuel Hunter, writing from Fort Augusta, praised its strategic value and defensive power. After the war, the Montgomery family returned to find their home in ruins and lived in the stone fort itself. It became known as Fort Montgomery, and parts of it still stand today. Conclusion: the legacy of blood and stone. Fort Freeland is not completely gone. It has been burned, buried, and is remembered only in fragments. But its legacy lives on in the scars of survivors and in the stone of Fort Rice. Fort Freeland still stands today behind Warrior Run School, where the school's name lives on their legacy as the Defenders. The Revolution was not only fought by generals and statesmen, it was won, inch, by families like the Vincents, the Freelands, the Durhams, on farmland, in cornfields, and under siege. Their story is our story, one of survival, sacrifice, and resilience.
Hey everyone, it's Johnny. Today we're checking out the awesome Warrior Run Church here in Pennsylvania. This place is super old. The Revolutionary War Church